Good morning, everyone. I can see people joining now. It is May 11th on 2020, and I'm Louise Walker here from the Squamish Chamber of Commerce. So thank you all for joining us here today. Before starting, I would like to acknowledge that we're having this virtual meeting on the traditional territories of the Squamish Nation. And today we're hosting a town hall with Patrick Weiler, who's our elected MP for the Squamish area, and Jordan Sturdy, who is our MLA and who represents us on our provincial level. I'd also like to thank the District of Squamish, who is helping make these sessions possible, free for everyone in Squamish. Just quickly before we start, there's a number of chamber resources available to support businesses during these challenging times. If you go to squamishchamber.com, you can find a COVID dedicated website with a range of links to government information, updates, webinars and other tools. And if you haven't done so already, we encourage you to sign up for our newsletter. That's the quickest way to get information from the chamber. So just email admin@squamishchamber.com if you haven't signed up for the newsletter. Obviously, we're here for you as your voice of business. We've been in constant contact with our members and giving feedback to different levels of government officials, and really the success of the chamber network as a whole across BC has been the opportunity to share data from businesses to government and help influence the programmes and give feedback. And of course, these town hall sessions today. So after Jordan and Patrick have done their updates, there will be an opportunity for questions. We are keen to keep this session interactive. We don't just want it to be one-way presentations. So, and I know Patrick and Jordan are really encouraged by this opportunity today to connect with you so that they can represent your concerns back to their respective levels of government. We're using the Zoom Q&A to pose questions. So you can do this by going to the Q&A on your screen and simply type in your question. And then you can also like the button to upvote a question, which will then automatically place you up to the top. And then finally, just to thank everyone for joining us today and engaging and supporting the community. In other sessions, I've been providing more updates on what the Squamish Chamber has been doing to support businesses. But today, I know that Patrick has to nip off for a meeting at 11. So I'm going to just quickly say go to squamishchamber.com to catch up on our resources. And now I'm going to introduce you to our panellists. We have Patrick Weiler, who is our MP, and Jordan Sturdy, who is our MLA. And I'm going to pass over to Patrick first.
Well, thanks, Louise, for organizing this, and for the Chamber for organizing, and for everybody for joining the call today. I just want to give a quick update, because I guess we last had a meeting about 5 weeks ago, and there's been many changes since then. But I'll try to keep it short so we can jump right to questions. And I know that Jordan has quite a lot to update you on, even in the last week. So I want to leave some time for that as well. So just quickly here, since we last spoke, there's been a number of changes to some of the main programs we've brought in relief of the pandemic. The big one, which was already announced but has since been expanded, is the emergency response benefit. And the most recent numbers that I've received is that there's 7.5 million people that have applied for this since it opened early April. And the eligibility has been expanded for this, and now you're able to receive this $2,000 a month benefit as long as you are without work or are receiving less than $1,000 because of the pandemic. And I have heard some challenges from some business owners about some of the difficulties that's made with some of their workers. So if you are experiencing this, please do reach out. I'm going to actually, after this call, I'm going to be on a committee meeting with the Minister of National Revenue, where I'm going to be asking some questions about this as well. The other big program we launched was the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy. This is up to 75% wage subsidy for businesses that have a drop in revenue of 15% for the month of March, or a 30% drop for the following months. We also expanded this so that you can calculate this using the cash or accrual accounting measures. And if you're a startup or a fast-growing company, you can look at January, February instead of the same month last year to as a measure. The announcement from Friday is that this was supposed to finish in June, and there's been an announcement that this is going to be extended further than that. And the most recent numbers I have on this is that there was 2 million people that had, or businesses had applied for 2 million employees to receive this benefit. And I know that companies from across the right now. The other two big programs I'd want to mention is the Canada Emergency Business Account. Likewise, this was a measure that was announced when we last spoke, but the eligibility criteria has been expanded since then. So now you're able to get this $40,000 no interest loan with a 25% loan forgiveness if it's repaid by the end of 2022, as long as you have a payroll in between 20,000 and 1.5 million last year. I know within the first week there was 200,000 businesses that had applied for this, for over 5 billion in loans. The other measure I wanted to mention is the Canada Emergency Commercial Rent Assistance Program, and what this provides is a subsidy for rent for small businesses. So the criteria is, if you're a small business or nonprofit with with rent $50,000 or less, which has received or has reduced income by 70% or more, you're eligible. For a commercial property owner, you have to agree to lower your rent by at least 75%. And what you get is the provincial government, the federal government are going to provide a 50% forgivable loan, provided that those conditions are met. And how it should work out is that the remaining 50% ends up being covered by the landlord and with the tenant. Be very interested to hear what the take-up has been in the community. I know that there's been many businesses I've spoken to that have had difficulties with this, some landlords that hadn't want to participate. But I will say also, for this program, it's going to officially be launched very soon, and some of the details and the bugs are still being worked out. So stay tuned for that. The last big thing I would like to mention is, I know there are many businesses that don't fit the criteria of the existing programs that have been announced. And 2.5 weeks ago, there was an announcement made that about $1 billion is going to be dispersed through the regional development agencies and the community futures programs. And the way that money is going to be dispersed is to really serve a lot of those businesses that are falling through the cracks. And I'm hoping there's going to be an announcement very soon, perhaps even this week, about that. So I'll just stop it there, and I'm sure many people will have questions, and I'll just leave that to that point.
Great, thanks, Patrick. And I think we'll just pass over to Jordan. Jen, can you just quickly check the waiting room? It looks like there's some people waiting to come in. So I'm going to pass over to Jordan for your quick update.
Thank you very much, Louise, and thanks for putting this together. Just to start off with a little bit of context, when is this thing going to be over? And we're into it for the foreseeable future. We're into it for a year, or until enough people are infected and have recovered, or when enough people have been immunized with a vaccine. So this is the normal that we have to deal with going forward. That's not a surprise to anybody. We've got to focus on suppressing the transmission at the lowest possible rate for at-risk populations until a vaccine becomes available, and balance by and ensure that we avoid the healthcare system being overwhelmed. And this is something I think we all have seen we've been quite successful at. In fact, I think we're running at about 40% capacity in the healthcare system in British Columbia right now. But we also have to, at this point, move forward and get us back to work, get us back into dealing with our contacts, our friends, our families, and that sort of thing. So how do we balance all of this? Maybe we can throw up those slides if we could. So where are we right now? We're in phase 1 of the response. We're currently in a. We have those slides up. There we go. So we're in a we as everybody knows, we've had a provincial state of emergency that has been in effect for about 6 weeks now. Has been renewed several times, and we expect to see that continued designation. With regard to this, so a number of industries or sectors have been identified as essential services, and as you can see, that's a pretty big list. That covers a good chunk of our economy, and we've had a different approach to the way than other jurisdictions, and so our recovery won't be the same as other jurisdictions either. So what we've done, rather than locking down, we've required what we call, or what the provincial health officer has called, safe operation. And so that has allowed people, are not necessarily required that businesses close, but many businesses have made the decision to close for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is if there's no business, there's not much point in being open. At this point, in terms of numbers, I think the rate or the numbers, jobs numbers that were put out just on Friday suggest that I think we have here in British Columbia 400,000 people unemployed, or that's a job losses in the last 2 months. So the next slide, if we could. The provincial health officer orders have only have been somewhat limited in some respects. So the issue of mass gatherings, that stands, no more than 50 people. The restaurants have closed for all but takeout and delivery, although there has been some alterations there to allow for the delivery piece to include liquor and that sort of thing. Bars and liquor service only are closed at this point. And as you can tell by looking at me, personal health care, our personal grooming services and that sort of thing have not been allowed to be in operation up until now, and that will change over the course of the next several weeks. There's various, let's see. Okay, next slide. So some of the programs that Patrick has mentioned, some of this, it says here that it's BC government supports, but it's actually not, because you can see that the bottom ones there, the commercial rent assistance and this sort of thing have been, and those 75% wage subsidy, these are federal programs. And so apologize for trying to take credit for federal contributions. But I know, as Patrick mentioned, this has been a challenge. That some of these programs have been a challenge for employers, and I know because I've had the same problem as many of you. When you put it together between the CERB and the BC program and the rental subsidy on a monthly basis, or multiplied over the course of the year, that's just over $42,000 a year in programs for an employee. And so especially for businesses that pay less than $42,000 a year, that is a problem to get people back to work. So next slide. This is an important one. This is, I think, something that we really need to focus on. This is about the new norm. This is about where we need to be going for the foreseeable future. And what it really emphasizes to me is there's a variety of different ways of making a difference, of making us safe, of making our employees safe. And the last resort is personal protective equipment. There's many things that we can do before that. And I think we have to do this as a society overall. We all have to embrace this. So for a businesses need to focus on their employees and making sure that their employees are safe. as safe as possible. But it also is all of us together. And you know, when we talked or a little earlier on before we got on here, we were talking about what was it like in Squamish, what was it like in Whistler, what was it like in Pemberton last weekend, and did people come up? Were people coming into our communities? And they clearly were and will be. And we're not going to be able to control everybody. So we have to develop a new norm so that everybody understands that this is what's acceptable. From a business perspective, of returning to safe operations, what government is going to require, or WorkSafe is going to require, is that businesses develop a plan that reduces the risk. And the plan addresses the 4 basic components. Your workplace is organized, how you carry out some specific activities, how you clean and sanitize, and changes and precautions, how you communicate that. So the common question, will WorkSafe be required to approve every plan? And no, they won't. They will not be approving every plan. They will not be reviewing them. But that doesn't mean that you don't have to have them. And if WorkSafe does come to do an inspection, they will ask your employees and the employer about what steps that you have taken to protect your employees. You must ensure that your employees understand the measures that you're taking to reduce the risk. So how do you do that? So you have to assess. First, there's 6 steps here. I'll run over them quickly. You have to assess the risk in your workplace, and there's be that how people congregate, or different tasks, or tools, or surfaces, that sort of thing. How you what measures you implement to reduce the risk, cleaning, hand washing, cleaning protocols, looking at the equipment that you have, and these are some of the things that are to be under physical distancing and engineering controls. How can you maintain the distances that you need to maintain? Does that mean reducing the overall number of employees, ensuring there's appropriate number of people in certain spaces, with the overall goal of trying to maintain that distance? But if you can't, then how can you reduce risk if you can't maintain the distance? And this is where the partitions and plexiglass and that thing comes into play. And you need to develop policies around ensuring that your employees understand that they can't come to work if they're at all feeling sick. We can't, and you can imagine, as a business, to be identified as a source of COVID transmission is clearly something that you need to do everything you can to avoid, for social reasons, but also for business reasons. Then you need to develop a communications plan, so to make sure that everybody does understand in your business what does it take to how do you train people, what type of signage and how you post it, or what type of signage is necessary, and how do workers, are they adequately supervised to ensure that they're responding to this or maintaining it, and then monitoring your workplace and updating as things change. And then the final step is just assessing the risk from resuming operations. So you might have some staff changeovers. You might have to change the way you operate, and these are things that you need to consider and incorporate into your business. And then remember, of course, that workers have a right to refuse what they believe to be unsafe work, and so that will be something that you'll need to be considering, and making sure that your employees feel good about coming to work. The next slide. So phase 2, moving on. Where are we going here? Well, clearly we need to reestablish, or the part of what we've done is, as I mentioned earlier, with the healthcare system, is that we're operating at a very low capacity, and but we've already had a wait list of surgeries for I think 91,000 surgeries that were elective, as it were, and we've added 30,000 to that list. So this is a 2-year recovery at least. And I think many people will also appreciate we've got to get back to some of those other medically related services as well. dentistry, not the least of which. So guidance is forthcoming on some of this. There's WorkSafe will help with provide some of that guidance. That's with the province, and but they're, I think we need to remember that they're not going to tell you how to do your business. They're not going to tell you in every individual business how to they'll provide general guidance, but ultimately the plans are yours. The plans are for your business. Some of the other hotels and resorts, this sort of thing, the film industry, these will start up in June or later, depending. Movies, that sort of thing, will again it'll be a little later in the summer. The idea, I think, is post-secondary will go back in September, as will K-12. Then some of the more difficult and challenging businesses, the nightclubs, casinos, and bars, are more complicated, and that's going to take additional time. And some of these big events will require that community immunity. That's something that we're ways away from. And then the least, and one of the big pieces for us is the international tourism, international travel, and that's going to take anything beyond essential travel is going to be distant, I think, in terms of when we're seeing travelers back here. So we're looking at a regional market from a tourism perspective, certainly. Last slide I have is next one, which is just there's an announcement the parks were reopening. Well, clearly in the Sea to Sky, parks aren't reopening. There's a couple that are open, but really the rest have been put on hold for now. I find it a little bit ironic that you will be able to go to the pub, but you can't go to the park. So not something I've supported, but however, it is what it is. And I think over the course of the next month or so, we'll start to see some of these things, some of these parks open up again. You've got to remember, I mean, this is, as I keep emphasizing, we have to learn to live with this. We have to balance it off between being fully open and being safe and making sure our healthcare system isn't overwhelmed. Government's position on this is that the parks in the Sea to Sky are part of the problem, I take it, but a little tongue in cheek here. But anyway, so we're all in this together. We need to learn to deal with it and keep the curve flat, maintain the healthcare operating capacity, and open up businesses and jobs and our society in general. Do it all safely. There is an economic recovery task force from the province, dominated by government officials and then representatives from some boards of trade, First Nations, and that sort of thing. We are missing some major contributors in terms of nobody's at that table for tourism or forestry or rural communities or the resource sector or frankly even the retail sector. So there's I think we should be lobbying the province to be more inclusive of what that economic recovery is going to look like and how we can participate. And I know there's lots of questions, so that's it.
Thanks, Jordan. I know you did answer a few questions there already, so that's quite useful because I was hearing questions around BC parks and when they were going to open in the Sea to Sky corridor. So there may be follow-up questions there. We do have questions coming in, so I'm just going to start firstly with Jackie Bastillion. Thanks, Jackie. So this is for Patrick. Do you have any insights regarding the extension of the wage subsidy program? Should we expect it, excuse me, to be extended month to month or for several more months? And do you know if the eligibility requirements will be changing? It's difficult to plan ahead if we can only do 1 month at a time. Patrick.
No, and I fully appreciate the challenges that creates, and really this announcement was made on Friday to give businesses some notice that is going to be extended for at least 1 more month. I don't have any, I can't say for sure for how much longer it's going to be extended. And really, as of last week now, more or less all of the provinces and territories have their reopening plan, which really helps now to be able to plan out where those needs will be, which businesses can reopen. So that gives some more information. But I can't say exactly for sure how long this is going to be, but it is very much a day-to-day, week-to-week type thing. But the key focus here is to support businesses to get through this, to make sure that there are jobs when we get through to the other side of the pandemic. And so that's really the frame to look at it in. And it may be in the future that you may not need as much of a wage subsidy. You may not need to show as much of a revenue drop to qualify for it. And I think the extension of the wage subsidy is really key for some businesses that Jordan and I speak about quite often, and that's really the tourism sector. So I was really happy to see that it has been extended, but just in terms of how long and what exactly it's going to look like, it's very much in flux. So, but I'd be happy. I don't have those details right now, but as soon as I do have access to that, I'd be happy to share it.
Thanks, Patrick. And I have a follow-up question to that, which actually can go to both of you, and is something I've been asked quite a lot about. Is so obviously we have to ensure that workers have a safe working environment. And at the same time, businesses are keen to have staff come back. But the $2,000 in CERB is quite attractive to some. Do you have any advice for businesses that are, how do they ensure that they can demonstrate the safe environment and get their staff back into work without getting them away from CERB? Any advice?
So this may be a question for Jordan, given that a lot of the guidelines around getting back to work are provincially mandated. I mean, that's working with WorkSafe BC to set those up. So, but it is certainly the concern about the draw of the CERB is one that I'm quite aware of, and that's why it's important that employees need to know that you need to reattest that you meet these eligibility requirements every 2 weeks. And one of those requirements is that you are involuntarily without work. So there will be enforcement of this down the road, and if employees are abusing that, they're putting themselves at risk. But maybe I'll turn it over to Jordan to speak about some of the details about how and the process for which companies can ensure that they're providing a safe place for their workers.
Yeah, thanks, Patrick. Well, I'm not sure that it's really the safety aspect of things that is what's discouraging people from coming to work, honestly. I think it now, and in fairness, the CERB is $2,000. The provincial program is just a one-time program. At least at this point, it was a 1-month deal, so it's $1,000. So then, and then there's the rental subsidy is $300 per person, or $500 per person, depending on the circumstances. But that when I added that all together, that's where I came up with a 42,000. So that's not going to be ongoing. So if as long as there is, from a federal perspective, a requalification or requirement to qualify, then at the end of the day, there's got to be an incentive to go back to work, as employers need employees. And it has been a challenge. I've had numerous businesses in touch with me to say, how can we get people to come back to work? And it's I know I've dealt with the same thing. I'm looking forward to it. Go ahead.
Sorry, we have a question there from Mike Skripnik. Hi, Mike. So if the plans are for the business owner, are there penalties being levied to owners who don't follow guidelines or are confused by them?
That's a good question. I have not seen, though there is obviously WorkSafe sanctions that are potentially put in place if the employees are in an unsafe situation or deemed to be in an unsafe situation. So that there is a good website, and I will provide it to you, Louise, so you can circulate
Yep.
it amongst everybody, from WorkSafe, which walks you through the process of developing a plan, what you need to consider in the plan. And I think it's just good business practice to be doing that. In terms of the public aspect of things, clearly, as I mentioned earlier, you don't want to be identified as a place where you can be exposed to COVID and or unnecessarily exposed. So as a business, any business owner has an obligation for themselves, if nothing else, for their own interest, to make sure that they've got a plan in place.
Yeah, yeah. And of course, all this information just came out on Wednesday, so we're all catching up a little bit from our end. Certainly, as the chamber starts to go into that same position of transitioning back to the office, we'll be going through the process as well. And I've found, even with the wage subsidy applications, going through it from our perspective as a business, I start to learn more about it. So we'll share any information that we find out. I have a question now from Jacqueline. So on Saturday, May 9th, I drove to Whistler for a medical appointment. All the parks, though closed, had people parked along the roadsides and hiking in. Large groups of people were congregating with no social distancing. How will the province enforce their phased approach? So that's you, Jordan.
Well, that's a great question, and it's not going to be easy. I don't believe, and this is what I was trying to emphasize, I don't believe that there is the capacity to enforce social distancing on everybody. We, as a society, need to embrace it and need to be safe. There's just not the opportunity or the resources for government to be enforcing. It's like, drinking and driving. It's just not acceptable, and that's the way I think that we need to look at it. But that's also why I believe that we should be opening up parks and opening up. I think there's 28 million acres of parks in British Columbia that are currently closed, and by forcing everybody to stay in town, or stay in their community and only use the local green spaces, I think that's counterproductive, frankly. So the sooner we can open up the province, the better.
Yeah, and I just add to that as well around the businesses. We've heard a lot of misinformation from some businesses. Some people thinking that Squamish bylaw is going around and issuing tickets, and that's really not the case.
No.
Moving on to a question from Connor Lorimer. So this pandemic has highlighted how vital childcare is to the wider economy. Research to date has shown that due to a lack of accessible childcare, women's participation in the economy has been affected most. Would you support, 1, lobbying the BC government to work with the camp industry to co-develop guidance and funding to increase access to high quality childcare during months where kids are at home because school is not in session? Sorry, it's a big question. And note, if no guidance can be established that allows for safe overnight programs, many camps will close. As of last week, 18 of 57 camps have closed summer operations. Many more are considering it. So this is a question around childcare and summer camps and support to co-develop guidance and funding. I think that's a bit of both because it's a provincial and a federal question.
Well, I'll start in terms of the childcare. There are additional guidelines that are being generated for childcare or daycare centers, and that is that there'll be routine daily screening for all staff and students, additional routine and frequent environmental cleaning, and a clear policy for children and staff who have any symptoms of cold, flu, or COVID, and with any coughing and sneezing not coming into daycares at all. And then just the additional note was a non-medical masks are not recommended for kids under 2. But additional guidelines will be coming out. I think WorkSafe is developing some more guidelines. And in terms of, and clearly childcare has been in crisis for the last number of years in the Sea to Sky. So, and it's even more so now. I think in Pemberton, we don't have any childcare facilities operating at all. The staff at this point in Pemberton don't feel comfortable coming back to work, or they don't feel comfortable opening up the facility. So we need to build that confidence, and that we can do this safely, and that we need to better understand whether children are vectors or whether they are not. They don't seem to be affected in the same way by COVID as older people, but they could well be vectors. So that certainly needs to be better understood. In terms of the camps, I know that's an issue that's been under discussion for some time now, and like many things, it will be a business decision to some degree. There'll be some guidance from public health about whether these camps can be open or not. But at the end of the day, it may well be a business decision for the organization.
Thanks, Jordan. Certainly, as a mum whose son goes to climbing camps all summer and out to Camp Summit in Evans Lake, I relate to that question quite a lot. And I do know that our climbing community has really shown quite a strong leadership, and they've been working with other climbing communities across BC, in fact, I think across Canada, to develop guidelines. Is there any guidance on which sectors should be coming forward with their own guidelines and which ones are going to be getting guidance from the province?
Well, as I said, these plans from a WorkSafe perspective are required, but will not be need to be approved. So that's more from an employee perspective. From a public perspective, it as I say, you don't want to be a vector. You don't want to be a source, and it's not good for business.
Okay, we have another question from Kurt, and just before I read it out, and so we are doing question and answers through the Q&A feature. So if you hover at the bottom of your screen, it will bring it up and you can put your questions in there. So Kurt Larson, who's from Getting the Loop, will we have more specifics on how and when restaurants can open, especially capacity numbers? We have heard from 20 to 50%. There is a significant difference between these numbers.
Yeah, there is. The Restaurant Association of British Columbia has been developing guidelines. They are in with the province right now for feedback. I think 50% was a general rule, although it really comes down to that social distancing, and so, or the physical distancing. So that 2 meters between tables, which in some places is just going to be incredibly difficult to achieve. There is a request of local government in the liquor licensing to allow for additional use of outdoor space. And some communities are even talking about closing roads and that sort of thing to allow for restaurants to spill outside, which is great when the weather's nice. And maybe we'll be able to deal with it over the course of the summer, but beyond that, it becomes more problematic. And I think this really does put a big question mark in play in terms of whether some businesses are going to be able to open or not. It just might not be worth it.
Now, Patrick, I know that you have to jump off in 5 minutes, so I'm just going to skip to a question that is for you here, and it's from Jacqueline again. So, Patrick, postal services for Squamish, Garibaldi Highlands is still considered a small town. So what that means is downtown Squamish is Squamish postcode, and then if you live in the Highlands in the Estates area, it's Garibaldi. So we have very limited service times and little by way of street postal boxes. It has gotten worse with COVID. There are many small businesses that rely on Canada Post services and yet are forced to live with an 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. counter service. Are you aware this is a problem for businesses in Squamish Garibaldi Highlands? And how do you plan to address this to get a significant change in service implemented?
Well, I think that's a very good question, and I've been hearing about challenges with Canada Post right from the beginning. And actually, I had a constituent on Thormanby Island that was concerned about having to go pick up her mail and traveling to Seashelt to do that because she had a PO box there. So I was able to get Canada Post to change it so they would keep mail for longer than 2 weeks, just so that she wouldn't necessarily have to leave right away to go pick it up. But this certainly is a challenge. This is something that with many Government of Canada agencies, particularly Service Canada as well, they're like everybody else, they're concerned about the pandemic. There's more and more people working from home, and that's had an impact on in-person service delivery. But I wasn't aware that the hours were that short. So this is something that I will bring up with we'll bring up with Canada Post, and to see if there's something that can be done about that.
And just to add to that, I heard that one of the challenges at the Garibaldi Highlands was around childcare and staff not being able to come in. That had impacted the hours there. And then there's another question here from John Matthews. Beyond the programs that have been put in place up to now, is there any insight into what the larger economic recovery plan looks like to get the economy back on track? If yes, when would we expect this initiative to start?
Yeah, well, it's a great question, and well, actually, just Louise and everybody, just so you know, I can stay on probably for until about 10:55. But yeah, and I think this relates to a few questions ago. Someone was asking about the challenges of childcare. And when we look at the job numbers now from Friday, we can see which sectors, which demographics have been most impacted by the pandemic. And what it has revealed is that disproportionately women have been impacted the most. And one of those reasons why is the traditionally childcare. So that, in the past, so much of when we're looking at stimulus is focused on infrastructure and building things. And that certainly will be part of the recovery plan. But it's certainly not going to be the only thing, because while construction was a sector that has been impacted, it hasn't been impacted as much as others. So these discussions about like the larger economic recovery plan are starting to take shape. This is something that is both happening at the provincial and federal level. Jordan mentioned earlier that there is an economic recovery task force that has been set up by the province. And on Friday, actually, there has been an industry strategy council that's been set up at the federal level as well to discuss longer-term recovery plans. But these are discussions that are very much happening right now. I know that I've had many conversations with the Minister of Infrastructure, innovation, economic development about what that's going to look like. And all these different ministries are putting together what their asks are for the Ministry of Finance. So this is actually a very good time for the chambers and from individual businesses to be reaching out to myself, to be reaching out to Jordan, because there's a lot of good ideas that government has, but there's many more great ideas that businesses have. But when we're looking at the recovery plan, there is going to be a big focus on getting as many people back to work as fast as possible. You'd much prefer to have people connected to jobs rather than at home collecting the emergency response benefit. So that's going to be a really big focus for, especially for stimulus spending. But this is going to be, we're going to be in certain levels of restrictions as long as we have the pandemic in place and until we have a vaccine. So that's going to be something we're going to have to be grappling with. But from the federal level, the frame that we're looking at it is both from an economic recovery point of view, but also taking into account some of our longer term perspectives that were announced in our speech from the throne. So that's, greening our economy. That's, making a more fair society. So that's going to be a big focus going forward. So when this initiative's to start, it's really being generated right now. And now that all the different provinces have their restart plans in place, it provides quite a bit better guidance for what can happen at the federal level as well.
If I might, Louise, just that clearly for the Sea to Sky, tourism is a huge part of our economy, and this is something that's going to require some special attention. And it may be that there's going to need to be supports that last longer in the tourism sector than are in other aspects of the economy. But I certainly support everything that Patrick said, and part of what we have to think about when it comes to these investments, especially for the Sea to Sky and the stimulus, and there'll be an emphasis on shovel-ready projects and infrastructure projects, and mostly that'll be municipalities and local government, First Nations, that sort of thing. But I think I know Patrick would and myself would like to hear ideas about what stimulus could look like. What kind of investments do we need in the Sea to Sky that will allow us to shift our economy, that will allow us to diversify, that will help us be more competitive, that will improve our overall business environment. And I don't know necessarily, I have some ideas, but I don't have all of them, that's for sure. And I'd like to hear what the business community says about what they feel is important in terms of investment. I know local governments will say, well, I need that sewer treatment plant upgraded, and I need those water lines fixed, and that's true, and that's important. But I think from a business perspective, there's maybe other things that we need to be thinking about.
Thanks, Jordan. Well, the Chamber will take that on as an action. We have a survey going out today to get feedback on the BC's Restart Plan, but we will add an extra question later this week to give members the opportunity, and all businesses, the opportunity to tell us what stimulus should look like and where we should be focusing our attention to be more competitive. So that's a good takeaway for us. Sticking with the Sea to Sky, so there's a question from Paul. Jordan, you mentioned travel to destinations in the Sea to Sky will be regional for the foreseeable future. And for those not in the tourism industry, regional typically means you can drive, so BC or previously Washington State. Does it appear international travel will resume by fall, winter 2020?
Well, that's probably a question more for Patrick. It is a federal responsibility, but I think the speculation is that it's not likely we're going to see international travel that is anything other than essential before the fall or even winter. And there is a big risk to all of us if that border remains closed for the next year to anything but essential travel. It's a real risk. It's absolutely there, and we've got to hope that we develop some vaccine or something that can allow us all to travel. But Patrick probably has a better sense of it than I do.
Yeah, well, it's really tough to say at this point, but I agree with what Jordan said. It's highly unlikely, I would say, that it opens before the winter. I participated on a Destination BC call last week where kind of the plan for tourism is kind of being laid out with a focus on kind of local, regional, national before international tourism. And so they've kind of developed a flow chart for what that's going to look like, which is really instructive. But it's I would say it's highly unlikely, and that's a big issue for tourism. And Jordan and I were talking with Mayor Crompton last week, and he was mentioning that the average international traveler spends about $400 a day in Whistler, and the average local traveler spends about $60 a day. So that's a really huge impact. But while we're not going to have the same level of or we're unlikely to have the same level of international tourism in the short to medium term, Canadians that would be traveling abroad, those Canadians aren't going to be able to do that. So that could lead to an increased domestic tourism market. So there is hope that can make up some of the gap there.
And then a question that follows up on this. So as long as the PHO, so the Provincial Health Officer orders, encourages non-essential travel or discourages non-essential travel, requesting people to stay in their respective communities, Is any level of government, the Chamber or Tourism BC, such Destination BC, suggesting business open for those residing in our respective communities only? So is it a Squamish for Squamish at the moment?
I'm not sure that I entirely understand the question. Businesses are going to have to make a decision about whether they can justify opening, and you know, I think we will see that there's always going to be or for the foreseeable future, there will be a suggestion that you should stick close to home, keep your circle as small as you can, make sure that we can keep the curve flattened. Does that mean, and recognize can be stressed by people getting out and about. So do take your level of risk down, but over the course of the next several weeks, there will be, I think, subtle changes to the way we describe this. So maybe not essential travel only, maybe limit your travel. But will you be able to go to your second home if you have if you do have a second home, or go to the place in the Caribou? Yes. Or go to the Sunshine Coast? Yes. But it's when it comes to the businesses are going to have to make a decision as to whether they can justify being open or not. Mm-hmm. That's a decision you're going to have to make.
And I think there's definitely a level of comfort as we start to phase into this reopening. So you get comfortable with your community, and then we'll see more regional visitors, and then eventually more international visitors. It will be a phase. This one's for you, Patrick, I think. Will there be any changes to the commercial rent subsidy? We've had a very hard time with landlords, and there's no incentive for them to agree to the rental assistance program for us, even though we have lost 95% of our revenue. We're also expecting hard times until at least fall. Would there be any requirement on landlords to put this in place for businesses with that type of loss, or extensions to the program as well? And I've heard this from other businesses, is how do you make the landlords participate?
Yeah, well, I maybe to disagree a little bit with the premise, because I do think that there is an incentive for a landlord to keep a good tenant. It'll be very challenging to find an alternate tenant, especially at this time. So I think there certainly is an incentive from that point of view. But in terms of changes to the program, the application hasn't been announced yet. I know that many of these challenges are still being worked out by small business right now. And so there may very well be changes very soon, but you know, at the end of the day, we're wanting to make sure that this is going to be a support that's going to allow businesses to get through this. So those challenges are very live, and there's been lots of good suggestions I've heard from businesses just to do that very thing. So so this application is supposed to open in about a week or so. And up until that point, I would say everything that's been announced to now is those are going to be the guiding principles. But if there are ways to tweak it to make sure that more businesses can access it, that's something that's certainly being considered right now.
And then this one goes back to restarting. So this is from Mike Squamish. Can you please comment on the risk to employers from a legal and insurance standpoint? If they are open and doing all they can, but a customer gets infected or an employee does, decide to step back to a close, clean and reopen, and the obvious health concerns, will there be a risk of litigation for employers? While it seems common sense that illness happens, even with precautions, is this difference in terms of liability? The wellness industry is a big risk for
this. Great question. I don't have an answer for you. I know that, as I mentioned earlier, with regard to employees and WorkSafe, if there is an outbreak in a business, then WorkSafe will be doing an investigation. And if there was inadequate plans and inadequate implementation of the plans, then I imagine there will be WorkSafe sanctions, which can be significant. With regard to the public, and is there a public liability? That's a good question, and I can't answer that, but I will. I'll seek to see if I can find out an answer. Patrick's a lawyer. Do you have an answer, Patrick?
Well, I think this is my time to jump off the call here. No, I mean, I don't really want to be giving legal advice here. This is something I would reach out to your attorney to do just that. But it certainly is something to be aware of. And I think likewise with a lot of these programs, a lot of the questions people had, particularly about if you have an employee that may be abusing the CERB, I would really speak to legal counsel about that. They'll be able to give you better advice suited to your particular circumstance. So I would just advise that way. But at the same point, I do need to jump off this call right now. So I just want to say thank you everybody for participating, and thank you Chamber for organizing. Thanks Jordan for participating as well. And if you had a question that we weren't able to answer, please do send me an email or send Jordan an email, and I'll look forward to coming on another call and to hearing some of the great suggestions and ideas that the Chamber has. So thank you.
Thank you, Patrick.
And Louise, we'll see what we can do about getting an answer for you on that particular question, at least in a broad way, and maybe you can disseminate it.
Yeah, because I think that definitely applies to pretty much
a good question.
everyone.
Yeah.
I do have a question that we touched on earlier, Jordan, so maybe you can just give a quick answer. But this business has joined to the call a bit late, so I think missed it when we were talking about it. It is very important for Squamish because of the importance of our climbing community, both for residents and for visitors. So the question is just, I'd love to know, I'm sorry, this is from a climbing gym. I would love to know how and when we can open responsibility in Squamish. We've heard there's already been a fitness centre who opened this week in Squamish, claiming to have the green light from Vancouver Coastal Health. We have a toolkit for climbing gyms that we have agreed upon, but what are the steps we need to take next? Can gyms, and specifically climbing gyms, open with restrictions right now?
Okay, as I mentioned earlier, WorkSafe will require that you have a plan, and go to the WorkSafe website. I'll get you the website, and it goes through the checklist of what you need to develop in terms of your employee safety plan. And as I mentioned as well, there will not WorkSafe or the province will not be, or the public health officials will not be requiring an approval of that plan. You will just need to have a plan in place, and your employees will need to understand it, and you'll need to make a decision as to whether or not you can open up safely. Now, in terms of, so there wouldn't have been, I don't imagine, a green light, as it were, for a gym to open. That's not the process as I understand it. But I would, I don't have the details on gyms. Actually, we'll try and figure that one out. But yeah, I don't have an answer for you there. I'm sorry.
We will share the WorkSafe BC information on our website and their newsletter and through social so that people have it. And sorry, that was a bit of a repeat question there for you, Jordan, but they joined late, so I wanted just to make sure.
Yeah, well, fair enough, but they may also want to get in touch with their public health officer in Squamish from VCH to get some feedback from there on that particular issue.
So I have one last question because we are nearly at our time up. So this question is from Jackie, the Sicilian. So regarding international tourism, I've been reading that New Zealand and Australia are considering opening their borders to each other since they're both in a good place in terms of COVID levels. Do you know if our federal government would consider opening borders to certain countries on this basis down the road? And unfortunately, this might be a question more for Patrick. presuming that Canada is among those doing well in terms of COVID management. So I can put that back to Patrick and see if we can have an answer. I don't know if you've got anything to add to that, Jordan, at this point.
Well, just that I know it has been a subject that has been canvassed already. It obviously is a two-way street. So Australia and New Zealand have very low levels, and they may feel comfortable with each other. Whether they'd feel comfortable with Canada, because Canada is Canada, and Canada includes Quebec, as we all know. So that I think we've got a long way to go before Australia or New Zealand would feel comfortable with us. But I think it's that staged approach to international travel is an excellent suggestion, and it's certainly something that has been considered. Whether it'll be implemented, we'll see.
Right. And then just to follow up on that Jim question, just I see a comment that they heard Dr. Bonnie Henry say no fitness centres in stage 2. So we'll have a look at this and see if we can try and get a better answer on the gyms, because obviously there's a lot in our community. So we have hit time, and I'm very aware that people are very busy. So I would like to take this opportunity to close things up. If we didn't get to anyone's questions, we will follow up. We are recording these sessions, and we'll post them on squamishchamber.com, where you'll also find our business resource section for COVID. We'll be doing more roundtables like this, some of them with just a smaller number of participants so that we can have more open discussion. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank everyone for attending, but also especially to Jordan and Patrick, who is now left, for taking this opportunity to hear from us, and we very much appreciate your engagement throughout the Sea to Sky. So thank you very much. I'm going to sign everyone out now, and please stay safe and healthy, and remember to be kind. Thank you.
Thanks, Louise.